Deep in the heart of a dense forest, there stood an old, abandoned house. It was a large, imposing structure with broken windows and a sagging roof. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the walls a mottled gray. The front door hung crookedly from its hinges, creaking in the wind. To anyone passing by, it would seem that the house had been deserted for years. But there were some who knew the truth. There were those who whispered of strange noises coming from the old house, of ghostly apparitions that could be seen flitting through the windows at night. Some said that the house was cursed, that those who entered would never return. Others believed that the house was haunted by the spirits of those who had died there long ago. Despite the rumors, a group of curious teenagers decided to explore the old house. They had heard the stories, but they were sure that there was nothing to fear. They entered the house cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. The air was musty and thick, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. As they explored the first floor, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The furniture was covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. But when they ventured up to the second floor, things began to get strange. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air was thick with the smell of mold. As they crept down the hallway, they heard a faint scratching noise coming from one of the rooms. They paused for a moment, their hearts racing, before cautiously pushing open the door. Inside, they found a room unlike any they had ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the peeling wallpaper in what appeared to be dried blood. The room was bare, except for a single, wooden chair in the center. The scratching noise continued, growing louder and more urgent. One of the teenagers, a boy named Tom, approached the chair. As he drew closer, he saw that there was something on the seat. It was a small, battered doll with a single button eye and a frayed dress. As he picked it up, the scratching noise grew louder and more frantic. Suddenly, the doll sprang to life in his hand, its remaining eye glowing red. It let out a high-pitched shriek, and the room was plunged into darkness. The teenagers stumbled backwards, tripping over one another as they tried to flee. They made their way back down to the first floor, but as they reached the front door, they found that it was blocked by a strange, glowing mist. The scratching noise continued, growing louder and more insistent. The teenagers huddled together, terrified, as the mist began to close in around them. In the darkness, they heard a voice. It was a soft, feminine voice, speaking in a language that they did not understand. The scratching noise grew louder and more insistent, until suddenly, the mist dissipated. The teenagers were shaken but unharmed. They fled from the house, never looking back. They later learned that the house had once belonged to a woman accused of practicing witchcraft. She had been burned at the stake, but some believed that her spirit had never left the house. Years later, the house still stood, its secrets locked away behind its crumbling walls. Some claimed that they could still hear the scratching noise at night, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lay hidden within the abandoned house. Despite the terrifying experience they had at the abandoned house, the group of teenagers could not help but feel a sense of curiosity about what had happened to them. They began to research the history of the house and the woman who had lived there. They discovered that her name was Isadora Blackwood, and she had been accused of practicing dark magic and consorting with the devil. Isadora had lived alone in the house for many years, shunned by the townspeople who feared and mistrusted her. It was said that she spent her days studying ancient tomes of forbidden knowledge and conducting strange rituals in her attic. As the teenagers delved deeper into Isadora's history, they began to experience strange occurrences. Objects would move on their own, and they heard whispers in the darkness. One night, as they sat in their local diner discussing their findings, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from outside. They rushed out to investigate and found a man lying on the ground, his throat ripped out. The group began to fear that they had awakened something dark and malevolent. They knew they had to find a way to put an end to it before it was too late. They decided to return to the abandoned house, armed with research and a plan. They made their way through the crumbling rooms, following the trail of strange symbols that Isadora had left behind. Finally, they reached the attic. The room was dark and filled with an eerie silence. They could feel a presence there, watching them. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles they had brought with them. In the darkness, they heard a soft voice. "Who dares to disturb my rest?" It was Isadora's voice, and it was filled with anger and malice. The group tried to explain their purpose, but Isadora would not listen. She lashed out at them with her powers, throwing objects at them and filling the room with a cold, evil energy. But the teenagers had a plan. They had brought with them a spell book that they had found in their research. They began to chant the words, their voices growing louder and stronger as they called upon the forces of light to banish the darkness. As they chanted, the room grew brighter and warmer. The cold, evil energy dissipated, and Isadora's ghostly form began to fade away. Finally, she was gone, and the room was filled with a sense of peace. The teenagers emerged from the abandoned house, exhausted but victorious. They knew that they had put an end to the evil that had haunted the house for so long. As they made their way back to town, they heard a voice behind them. "Thank you," it whispered. "You have given me peace at last." They turned around but saw nothing. They knew that Isadora's spirit had finally been laid to rest, and the abandoned house would be haunted no more.